Hello, I'm Sarah. This is Hardcover Hearts, and I'm here with my week of reading wrap up. This is where I talk about the books that I read this week, what I'm currently reading, and then potentially could read next week based on my mood. I had a very good reading week. This is a little belated. I didn't get one out last week, but I have some gems in here that I want to share with you. So hopefully it'll make up for my absence last week. The first one I want to talk about is a continuation on my project with Leo of A Little Book Life. And we are on I think this is number 15. This is Incidents in the Rue Logia. This is just such a lovely surprise. So I've been liking her last works. I feel like she's taking small steps forward. Well, this one was a leap. In this book, we have Harrison, a young man who finds himself in possession of a bookstore and a apartment above it. And the reason this came to be is because his parents were friends with an older man who owned this bookstore and loved it deeply, and for some reason thought that he would give it to Harrison in his will. Harrison feels a little tied down by this because he was just graduating and he was about to spend all this time traveling and living a really exciting life, and now all of a sudden he has to go tend to this gift that was bestowed upon him. He has a friend, and his friend is named Tyler. And Tyler is wealthier, and he knew him from school. And Tyler is one of those people that everyone just kind of gravitates to and everyone kind of falls a little bit in love with. And he's kind of a cad. He's kind of very flirty with everyone, knows his power, and therefore doesn't really treat everyone very well, even though he's very charming. Tyler has told him that he has access to an apartment in Paris, and Harrison was determined to go there. So he decides he's still going to keep that goal. He goes to Paris into this house, and it's just a room, very dark near in the back near a little alleyway where all the rubbish bins are kept. And while he's there, he realizes this might be his last hurrah. He also recognizes that it's kind of lonely to travel on your own, and it's not the romantic dream that he expected it to be. Out of nowhere, Tyler shows up and gives him a ring and says, "Hey, come with me, meet me, jump on the train, meet me in the countryside tomorrow, come for the weekend." And kind of hangs up. And so Harrison had already thought about going back to London. He thinks, okay, I'll extend it a little bit. While he's there in this countryside home, he meets this young woman named Maud. Maud is there with her mother, Nadine. And Maud has been raised to know that the moment she turns 18, she's getting booted. And so she better find herself a husband. The mother, Nadine, has just done her part. She feels like she's done her bit. There's not enough money for both of them. And so she has always told Maud that she better find someone and somewhere to go. They're at their aunt's house, and that's Xavier's mother. And there's a very interesting dynamic between Nadine and her sister that's just really wonderfully played out in this book. So we have the French countryside, and that just seems to open something up in Anita to kind of write in a different manner, write a little bit more sensual writing, more interesting, a little bit more risque, a little bit more libertine influences are at play, which was great. It was great to see. Needless to say, Maud gets pulled into Tyler's web. And this has a ripple effect in the household. She's supposed to go to London anyway for later on in the summer. Maud and Nadine were only supposed to be there for a week, not to put too much on the sister in terms of their hospitality, because it's very well known that Nadine and Maud do not have a lot of money, and so they're treated a little bit as if they're impoverished by the aunt, Xavier's mother. It's very clear that something's happened between Tyler and Maud that's upset the aunt very much, and she kind of says, okay, party's over. So what ends up happening is that Harrison, Tyler, and Maud go back to Paris, and something happens in Rue Laugier that changes all three of them in very interesting ways. Yeah, so I just loved it. I thought it was a return to Anita in a different way. She's broadened the aperture a little bit. We get a broader scope. We get more interesting people. She's applied her nuanced look at characters and applied them to more people than just the sad older woman. And I just thought it was great. And Leo, I think, also loved it. You'll find out in his video. I'll put a link to his channel below. So well done, Anita. So the next book that I read was part of my year of reading subscription from Shakespeare and Company. This was sent by them with this little wrapper. Think of it like a shelf talker for each book. So I'm going to take this off, show you the cover. Gorgeous cover right here. This is a tiny book. So I read this for Shorty September. I had been meaning to get to this. I just hadn't had a chance. And imagine my surprise when I opened it up. And while I was expecting to see the Shakespeare and Company stamp, what I did not expect to see was a signature plate. I'm curious about what's going to happen in the future about these signature plates, because it's so much about the pandemic and when authors weren't able to actually get into bookstores to sign. And so they sent these to be affixed to books. I'm wondering what that's going to mean for the value of books down the road. Anyway, just an aside. So this book, what do I want to say about this book? This book had the feeling and vibe of like a really chill indie movie, where it's second person. It's very, each frame is set up in a specific way. It's very stylized. The second person keeps you at a distance, so it's a little cool, a little interesting. It doesn't kind of suck you in, which is interesting because this is a love story and it's a very poignant love story. So it's one of those books that it didn't always work for me, it worked for me more than it didn't. How about that? The remove was very self-conscious. It felt like we were not meant to get too close. It's set in current day London, which I loved very much. So much about walking through the streets and all of these places that I know made me miss London very, very much. And it's about a young Black couple that are falling in love. And this is a slow burn of a romance, just really thoughtful, really careful, very vulnerable type of love story. In the front and center of this is art, and art in many different forms. So our main character is a photographer, and the woman that he's falling in love with is a dancer. And we have throughout this, music is kind of this undercurrent under everything. And so that when I talked about that self-conscious remove, there's like beats to this book. There's beats where there's like gaps and spaces. And then there's beats where it's, like this drumming, this thunderous drumming where things are heightened, things are getting more intense. And then there's like the languis or the passages of time that go on where nothing happens. And I thought that was so well done. He talks about music. He references music. He references culture. He references books and so much about Black culture, which is just wonderfully interwoven in through here. The main narrator is really tender. He's got this tenderness, but he also has this inability to really talk about what's going on. And I think a lot of it is because there's this constant sense of casual, dangerous racism in the form of police. He is frequently stopped because he looks like someone who was doing something wrong. And he's very conscious of that each of those situations could end up poorly for him. And that chips away at him, and it chips away at his self-esteem. It chips away at his his exuberance for life and his feeling that he can do anything. It really taps down very strongly on his aspirations and his dreams. I thought it was really beautiful. It was poignant, layered, very thought-provoking, and it's tiny. This is a very small book, but it packs a punch, and there's a lot in here. I know second person is not everybody's favorite. I think second person was leveraged effectively in this book because all of the layers and all of the other things that come into play. And that romance was just, it did touch me. It did touch me. Okay, next up, speaking of romance. So, I'm also reading with Elizabeth of Bookish North. We're reading Virginia Woolf's oeuvre, and we'll finish all of her fiction this year. I'm starting Orlando. I'll talk about that in a moment. And because I'm starting Orlando, I realized that I had pulled something for Shorty September that seemed like a no-brainer. And that is the book All Passion Spent by Vita Sackville-West. So let me show you that cover. So in case you don't know, Vita Sackville-West was lovers with Virginia Woolf. They had a very passionate love affair, even though both were married. And supposedly she was the muse for Orlando. She's definitely in the acknowledgments, or it was dedicated in the dedications, I should say. And so I was like, oh, well, this would be perfect. For Shorty September, let me read this. Why did no one tell me how great this is? This was so good. This was published in 1931 by Hogarth Press, which is Leonard and Virginia Woolf's publishing company. And this has a phenomenal old lady. And I love my old lady stories. Beautifully constructed book that just kind of peels itself away and gets deeper and deeper as you go into it. At the very first, when we open up the story, we meet a wife that's in mourning for her husband. Now, her husband was a very important man. He was the Viceroy of India, and he was also a prime minister. And the family, the children, are all kind of whispering, what's going to happen to mom? What's going to happen to mother? Who's going to take care of her? What's going to become of her? And their impression of her is that she was a doting wife, that she was always there, always by her husband's side, and her devotion to family was exemplary and all-encompassing. And so they think that because her husband has passed away, that she's just going to crumble, which is kind of a surprise for them. So we see the children kind of having these machinations of figuring out what they want to do, how they want to make sure that she doesn't spend all of her money, and that there's some left over for them. But at the same time, they don't want to do too much. Just bad. They're bad people. So the first part of the book is spent doing that. The second part of the book is where she actually steps forward and declares what she wants, which takes them all by surprise. What she wants is, she has dreamt of this little small home, a little cottage in Hampstead Heath for 30 years. And she's determined that that is where she's going to live. Now, she doesn't know anything about it. She knows no more about what's happened to this home in 30 years than anybody knows of it. But she's determined that that's where she's going to be. And so at 88, she makes the decision that she is going to find this place, and that's where she's going to live with the woman who's been taking care of her as her maid for many years. And so she renounces all of her obligations, and she moves into this home, and she meets all sorts of characters, all sorts of interesting people. She's just quite excited by her new life and how much simpler it is and how much more she enjoys it. And she meets someone who sends her down memory lane and who also puts her to the test. And I'll say no more because I think it's worth your time, if you're interested in those types of stories, to give this one a go. I just thought it was just so brilliantly done. The writing was so good. The character was fantastic. And it really touched me. I'm so glad that I read this. There we go. And let's talk about like the wisdom of the Woolfs in publishing this as well as Orlando, basically creating a little bit of a stir about these two books, almost like a publishing marketing campaign. How about that, huh? Okay, then on a roll with Shorty September. I've always meant to read this. This is George Simenon's Red Lights. Ironically, the introduction is by none other than Ms. Anita Brookner. Who would have expected? Who would have expected? And this was translated from the French by Norman Denny. So this was a gem. What a surprise. Now, Bert from Past Story Time, Bert and Shawnee from Past Story Time, as well as Heather from Soggy Expat Book Nerd, they're the ones who are hosting Shorty September. And Bert has told me that I would like this book, and he was not wrong. I mean, Bert's rarely wrong about stuff like that. I mean, has he ever been wrong? I don't think so. Think of this as like a noir highway book. It opens with a husband and wife meeting in a bar in New York City on Friday. And they have, their summer is over. Their fun summer where they get to just be with themselves, with each other, I should say, is over. And they have to get in the car, they have to go home, get in the car, and start to drive to Maine to pick up their children who've been away at camp. They have a couple drinks at the bar, and then they head home. For some reason, our main character, Steve, gets it in his mind that he needs a little more lubrication than he got at the bar earlier. So he sneaks out and he stops at a bar and has a little bit more alcohol. They get in the car and they start driving, and he pulls off and stops at another bar, just to go in and to get a little something. Meanwhile, the wife is getting more irritated, and she definitely is seeing that he's a little looser than he should be. This is way before drunk driving laws and all of that were really in effect. At the next time he tries to pull this, she said, I refuse to go in. Don't do this. And she says, if you do it, I'll drive off. And he goes, well, I'll take the keys. And she says, well, I'll take the bus. So he wants to kind of show her. So he goes into the bar, and from there, everything starts to kind of blow up in slow ways. We have a very difficult character here, really obnoxious, and he's really putting on another persona in this book. He's trying something out, and it has horrible consequences in many different ways. I don't want to spoil this because, again, Shorty, it's a short book, and so but it's packed full of things. I was incredibly appreciative of the ending. I thought the ending, for the time it was written, was so well done and had so much insight and thoughtfulness that I didn't expect for the time. So yeah, great book. And of course, I couldn't read the introduction until after, and then I read Anita's words on it. So like bonus there, right? So I was on a roll with some great books, and then that roll came to a screeching halt. And this was Mrs. March by Virginia Feito. I got this on audio from my public library. So in this story, we have Mrs. March, and it opens, the premise is fantastic. Mrs. March is married to Mr. George March, who is a famous author. And Mr. March has just written a blockbuster book. It seems like it's in everyone's hands and everyone's talking about it, but she hasn't read it yet. And people are kind of abuzz, and someone makes the mistake of asking her if she's honored that he based the main character on her. Now, she knows enough about this book to know that the main character is a slovenly whore. She's literally a prostitute who's older, and no one wants to sleep with her. They pay her money out of pity, but they don't want to sleep with her. And she's aghast and affronted, as you can well imagine, and cannot understand why people would think that. And it starts her into this questioning mode of everything that's going on in her past and how people see her. And we start to see her reflection of herself versus other things that are happening around, which shows that they're not matching in any way, shape, or form. This book had a kind of paranoia that keeps ramping up to the point where, and this is not a spoiler, this is in all of the pre-press, she starts to believe that her husband's keeping something from her, and that something is that he may have killed a woman. And so now all of a sudden she wants to prove that that's what happened. I don't like fever dream type books. I find oftentimes that a book with like that premise or that style is a way to mask a lot of gaps in being able to craft plot. And I just think it masks a lot of flaws in a book. It's one thing to have a section of a dream of a book that has a fever dream or has that kind of fevered pace or anything, but this book just from the very beginning, just all the way through to the very, very end. And it wasn't a surprise to me. It was the revelation I figured out way earlier. And I just wasn't enamored with it in the way that I think some people have been. So for me, it just was a miss. I just didn't get it at all. But let me tell you a book that I just finished this morning. I actually read a significant chunk of it last night, could not put it down, had a pot of tea just so I could read more because it was Friday night. Wow. Great Circle by Maggie Shipstead. This was just put on the short list for the Booker Award, and man, is it magnificent. It is so good. We have two timelines in this book. Two young women who were basically orphaned, abandoned when they were very, very young and left with uncles to raise. One in the earlier timeline eventually becomes a famous aviatrix. So she was one of the women who was flying and doing really interesting things as a female pilot. The current day woman, her name is Hadley, she has read a book when she was very young about Marion Graves, the aviatrix. And she's an actress, and she is approached after basically blowing up her life through decadence and bad decisions and bad choices. She's approached to play Marion in a biopic. And we go back and forth between the two. I'm happy that more of the time is spent in Marion's story itself, because I think Hadley's section, while interesting, would not have held up if it was more of the book than it is. But we have such fantastic writing, such fantastic plotting, such great characters. I felt so much for Marion and her twin brother Jamie, and their family as they're growing up. They grow up in Missoula, impoverished, but Marion is one of those characters that you just want her to do well. You want good things for her because she tries so hard and works so hard and does not let things get in her way. This was phenomenal. Even if I don't read any more of the Booker shortlist, if this wins, I will be perfectly, perfectly happy. So I would love to know, have you read this and what your thoughts are? So that's what I finished this week and a half. Let's talk about what I'm currently reading. Yeah, I have not spent enough time with Proust. I'll be rectifying that. Volume 3, In Search of Lost Time. This is Guermantes' Way. I mentioned that I'm reading Orlando with Elizabeth the Bookish North. I'll put a link to her channel below. Oh man, she opened with a horror of a paragraph about Orlando being a 16-year-old, being in the attic of his castle home, and basically pretending that he is having a sword fight with a head, a literal skull of a Moor or a black man, that the father had killed him, grandfather had killed himself, and just had in the attic. And it's grisly and it's horrible and it's very upsetting. And I just thought, my God, y'all heard me talking about how much her racism was bothering me. You didn't tell me what was coming. What else do I need to know? But in here, she also plays with the idea of not judging the time because it was Elizabethan, which I thought was, okay, I see you. I see you playing with historical fiction. Yeah, here's the exact thing she says. This is on page 20 of this edition. This is the Oxford World Classics edition. Soon, however, Orlando grew tired, not only of the discomfort of this way of life and of the crabbed streets of the neighborhood, but of the primitive manner of the people. For it has to be remembered that crime and poverty had none of the attraction for the Elizabethans that they have for us. So I see you playing with like, well, it was a different time. I'm watching you, Virginia, I'm watching you. So far, Orlando's a horrible character, but there's so many vivid, amazing, vivid writing in here. It feels almost surreal in some aspects, some scenes. You could tell she's poking fun, and it's much lighter. You could tell that she was weighted down by To the Lighthouse. That was so much about her family and all of this historical thing. Whereas here, she's kind of doing something almost farcical, wild, imaginative, very, very different. And it feels like she's having fun. I just wish her fun didn't involve racism. That's just me. Anyway, let's moving on. Continue to read this. I'm reading through all of her work so that I can have a informed conversation about her work. Let's talk about the next book I'm reading, which I'm adoring. This is Katalin Street by Magda, translated by Len Ricks. I'm reading this with Natalie of A Curious Reader and just loving this. The first bit was really hard to get our arms around. So many characters. And the connections between the characters were very hard to understand. I actually had to diagram it out. Thank goodness Natalie said she had to do something similar. But we trusted that Magda would get us there, and get us there she has. This is really about Hungary during the start of the war and Jewish challenges with the Jewish community. And what was happening in Budapest at the time. Just powerful writing. She's such an amazing, amazing writer. It's not just what she puts in, it's what she leaves out that is remarkable. And she's so good with nuance, so good with allowing you as the reader to get yourself there. She does not pander. I love her writing so much. So we are continuing with this. So that's it. That's all of the books I had to talk about today. Thank you so much for watching. And as always, please maintain safe social distance. We're not out of the pandemic yet. Wear your mask, wash your hands, and don't touch your face. I will look forward to talking to you again next week. Thanks for watching. Bye.